MENA region has been, still is, and will continue to be for quite some time, the prime supplier of oil to the world. This is simply due to the fact that the remaining recoverable conventional oil reserves in the region amount to 1.2 trillion barrels, compared to the world's total of 2.4 trillion barrels, i.e. about half of the world's proven conventional oil reserves is in the MENA region. The oil production currently in the region is 25 million barrels per day of the world's total of about 90. The growth in oil production of the region between now and 2035 is expected to be 12 million barrels per day. This is the additional production of the world's total of 12.8 million barrels per day, i.e. 93% of the growth in the world oil production is going to come from this region. The upstream investment needed to develop these resources in the MENA countries till 2035 is estimated to be around $2.7 trillion compared to the world total of $15.5 trillion, i.e. only 17% of the total investment needed to add 93% of additional oil production. It's clear then why the world is so much interested in the energy prospects of this region. Iraq is one of the most important countries in the region, and its potential for long-term sustained production of oil and gas was subject to thorough study by the Iraqi Ministry of Oil, by IOC operators in the oil and gas fields, and international consultants that were hired by Iraq. These studies have taken into consideration several relevant factors, including field potentials, best industry practices to maximize recovery from each field, the economic, regional, and world growing demand for energy. A scenario of about 9 million barrels per day of production by 2020, sustained for over 20 years, was recently adopted in our energy strategy. This scenario meets 5 strategic objectives that were put for the Iraqi energy sector: energy security at home, value maximization, economic diversification, environment sustainability, dependable long-term supply of oil to the world market. The first question that comes to mind is how crucial the Iraqi hydrocarbon reserves are in meeting the growing global demand for oil and gas. The proven oil reserves in Iraq are 150 billion barrels. Recent International Energy Agency assessment is that Iraq has around 232 billion barrels of ultimately recoverable oil reserves, of which only 38 billion barrels have already been extracted. Reserves to production ratio is among the highest in the world. At more than 50 years, even at 90 million barrels per day without taking into account new discoveries. Just what we have now without the new discoveries, and if we reach our maximum projected production at 9 million barrels, we still have 50 years to go. Iraq's oil reserves are on par with the world leader, Saudi Arabia. However, Iraq has depleted only 16% of its reserves compared to over 24% for Saudi Arabia and 50% for the rest of the world outside the major Middle Eastern producers. Iraq's oil reserves, proven and potential, constitute some 19% of the world's total. Natural gas reserves are at 112 trillion cubic foot, standard cubic foot at present, without taking into account the highly probable reserves of the western deserts and the deep horizons of the discovered fields. With this additional potential, Iraq's total gas reserves could be as high as 280 trillion standard cubic foot, placing Iraq among the world's top 5 holders of conventional gas reserves. With such a resource base, Iraq can increase oil production to levels that I have outlined without straining its fields, and will be able to sustain high production rates for many years to come, while other producers would have entered their peak production and started decline. In general, peak production rates end when around half of the field's oil reserves are extracted, then decline sets in. The rehabilitation efforts of the hydrocarbon sector in Iraq began with the licensing rounds that saw the return of the major international oil companies back into the country on terms that were viewed as tight for the oil companies. Still, the relatively low remuneration fees did not deter these companies, given the large reserves at stake. Since Iraq signed its first field development contract by the end of 2009, oil production has been growing at increasing rates and surpassed 3 million barrels for the average of 2013 last year. The short-term plan is to reach an oil production capacity of 4.7 million barrels per day in 2015, then expand to the targeted level of 9 million barrels per day by 2020. During the first 4 years, the following results were achieved: an increase in oil production rate from about 2 to 3 million barrels as an average for last year. Iraq's oil revenues totaled $320 billion, which amounts to about 90% of the total revenues of Iraq during the same period. Some of the first licensing round contractors achieved the 10% target increase in production within only 9 months. More than 600 wells have been drilled. Some 70,000 unexploded mines were removed from the areas of operation. Thousands of Iraqis were trained inside and outside Iraq. In general, the IOCs, and I can see some of them in the room, have more than met their contractual obligations and technical and financial terms in these 3 years. The next stage of complete development of oil fields will take about 5 years, in which huge projects costing tens of billions of dollars will be implemented to reach and maintain the plateau levels of optimized production rate for each field. Given their track record and field performance, coupled with their worldwide experience, financial and technical capabilities, we are confident that they will meet and maintain production targets that I have mentioned. Iraq's increased production is coming online at a time of tight oil supplies in most oil-producing countries. In a study conducted by IEA, it is estimated that the crude oil price may reach $140 per barrel by 2030 due to tight supply, notwithstanding serious interruptions due to political or other causes. Therefore, Iraq's oil supply to the world market is timely and assuring that sufficient oil is available to meet market demand. Global energy demand will increase by about 30%, and in some countries, especially China, India, and other strongly developing countries, energy demand may grow by 60% in the coming 25 years compared to what it is now. Contribution of oil and gas in the world primary energy mix is going to grow from about 55% today to 60% in 25 years' time. So the dependence on oil and gas is not going to be reduced. Oil production is estimated to grow by about 1% annually, reaching around 110 million barrels per day by 2030, from around 90 million barrels per day today. This is a significant increase, and meeting it will require trillions of dollars in investments and advances in energy technology. The growth in energy use would be more than triple this amount were it not for expected gains in energy efficiency across the world economies. Various studies estimate that to meet such an energy demand, global energy infrastructure investment will be needed to average approximately $1.5 trillion annually in 2010 through 2035. Half of that amount is to be spent on oil and gas field developments. The cost of developing Iraqi oil fields is among the lowest in the world due to a relatively uncomplicated geology, shallow depth, flat terrain, and medium-grade oil that can be pumped easily. The development cost to produce a barrel per day in Iraq is between $7,000 and $15,000, with an operating cost of $2 to $3 per barrel, which is about 1/5 of that in other parts of the world outside the MENA region. Thus, Iraq has become the most sought source for new oil discoveries and investments, and it is estimated that about half of the global incremental oil demand by 2020 onwards would be met by Iraq. Although hydrocarbon exploitation is central to our economy, but we also place high priority in our energy strategy on economic diversification. In the short term, oil is likely to remain the single most dominant sector. This implies that the economic growth will move in parallel with oil production. According to IMF, the GDP in Iraq is expected to grow at an average of 10% annually in real terms over the next 10 years, while Iraq's population growth is about 2.8% per year. Iraq's prosperity depends on sustained oil production and prudent use of the wealth it generates. In the long term, as prosperity takes hold, diversification of economic activity will attenuate this dependency. But for the foreseeable future, Iraq's energy industry is vital to Iraq's social and economic development. Development in the energy sector has the potential to strongly affect the GDP and economic diversification. Iraq's GDP last year was $230 billion, and the per capita was $6,500. Revenues from oil exports constitute nearly 40% of our GDP. Additional 40% of the economy is supported indirectly through oil-funded government expenditure, subsidies, and private sector support services. To attain such a development goal, Iraq requires, among other factors, to immediately develop its infrastructure across all energy subsectors: oil, upstream and downstream, gas, power, and linked industries, namely petrochemicals, fertilizers, steel, aluminum, cement, and bricks. The development must be rapid, but also balanced. These subsectors are interdependent and need to evolve in parallel. Sustained economic growth requires the basic infrastructure of all these subsectors to be in place, with effective linkage between them. The breakdown in these linkages will create supply bottlenecks that waste time, resources, and opportunity. In the power sector, Iraq suffers from severe shortages of electricity, as it is well known. These shortages impose major costs on the economy, in addition to significant hardships on the citizens. It is estimated that the total cost to the Iraqi economy attributed to power shortages may reach $40 billion annually. The energy-intensive industries in Iraq are underdeveloped. These industries can be the foundation of multiple secondary industries and thereby provide a vital link in converting Iraq's energy resources into national economic growth. Given the political disturbances in the MENA region, particularly in Syria, I am often asked how these instabilities and flow over into Iraq may affect energy development plans. The ongoing conflict in Syria has resulted in an increasing number of terrorists using vast desert areas between Syria and Iraq to establish bases from which they have carried out attacks against civilian population and economic targets and infrastructures. Attacking the energy sector has been among their top priority to deprive the country of its main revenue source. The attacks have been focused on oil export pipelines, power generation, and transmission lines. The Iraqi-Turkish pipeline was blown up 54 times during 2013, averaging once a week. But yet, we managed to repair and use that pipeline to pump on average 250,000 barrels per day last year. We would have pumped 500,000 barrels per day through that pipeline had the Kurdish regional government met its 2013 budget obligation to hand over 250,000 barrels per day of oil produced in the region. The terrorist attacks in the Western Desert have also hindered the exploration and exploitation of the vast natural gas resources in that region, and the development of Gayara and Najmeh oil fields that were contracted in the second bid round have not been developed as expected due to instability in that part of the country. But despite these terrorist activities, Iraq managed to increase oil production and export from the south, where our major oil fields are located, and kept on operating our largest refinery in the north, at Beji. We also have plans to diversify export routes to the Mediterranean through Turkey and Syria, and to the Red Sea through Jordan, to minimize risks of export interruption due to regional conflicts and establish a reliable, alternate, and complementary routes to the southern terminals to market the increasing quantities of oil produced. We hope that the ongoing negotiations in Geneva would bring about a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Syria, where the people can live in peace and work together to rebuild their country. Iraq stands ready to help in any way necessary in the reconstruction of Syria and in the economic development of the MENA region. Thank you.